It's the 11th of April, 2025. Coming up on today's Global Intelligence Agency Operations Report. It's been a wild week for global stock markets prompted by tariffs. The Trump Organization prompts Congress to buy now, hours before announcing a 90-day 10% tariff relief. A few hours after that, he announced the same on Trump's social. Ever wonder why the deep state waits for full moons, new moons, and planetary alignments all year long? I know we have, and now we know why and why it isn't working. And deep state ceremonies are going on all over the world as they await their new appointed positions. Apparently, they didn't get the memo that they were never in the running. Well, it's the 11th of April and the day before another full moon. Woohoo! Deep State is anxiously awaiting a lot of things, and we're going to talk about that. But we have a lot to go over, so I'm hoping we can make it all the way through this report, unlike the last one. So I do apologize for not getting the report out on Wednesday. It's been quite a week here. We had a little bit of a security issue. Apparently, they waited till we were in the middle of the report. But that's okay. We're okay over here. Everything is okay. It's not the first time something like this has happened here. The last time was probably about 2018, 2019, since that has happened. But all is well. All is okay. But a little bit rough. It's been interesting to say the least. Access points to what we call Earth's grid, so to speak, were breached pretty heavily in the last couple of days. And it's mainly, in this case, this was my fault. It was because of a dead man switch I hit shortly before the report. So that's okay. Everything's all right. So let's get into some regular news first, and then we'll start to talk about all the reasons why, what's going on behind the scenes a little bit. So stock market, that's been an interesting roller coaster ride this week. Market's pretty well tanked there for a little bit. Again, this is all stock market manipulation going on behind the scenes. When they couldn't steal money from a back door they thought they had with the stock market, they went ahead and tried to steal it through the front door. And they did manage to do that. Not a ton, but quite a bit. And basically how they did that is they announced the tariffs, obviously, and they're crazy. And we talked about that a little bit last week already. But before they were going to announce a 90-day stay at 10%, so the tariffs will remain at 10% for a period of 90 days. This was the way they, I guess, in their infinite wisdom over there at Duck Dynasty Land, thought that they could manipulate the stock market from the outside instead of from the inside. So they spent a couple of days calling all of their corporate sponsors and campaign donors and even Congress and Senate and told them that they are going to make this announcement, so now is the time to buy. They announced it ahead of time to their inner circle and gave them an opportunity to buy while the market was down and the market was low. The fact that the market did go down because of the tariffs was no surprise. That is a normal response because anybody who does a lot of importing and exporting to the United States would obviously have a significant problem in profitability. Prices would go higher. Therefore, that would affect the company's bottom line, which is pretty much encompasses most of those that participate, or public companies, I should say, those that issue stock on the public market. So by notifying Congress and Senate ahead of time, not like it really matters to these people, but that was a significant violation of the Stock Act, because of course they then all called all of their corporate sponsors or campaign donors and told them that this was going to happen. And it was an effort to, well, take money from everybody. When nobody wanted to donate any more money to the Duck Dynasty administration, Trump administration, they decided this was a way to get them to donate one way or another. So they went ahead and told them all to buy. Well, the market is low. And then when they didn't get enough, then they took to social media and Trump Social and other social media sites and told everybody now is the time to buy. They gave everybody a couple of hours when it came to social media, but the insiders had quite a bit of headway that this was going to happen, maybe, a day or two. So shortly after they announced this on social media, they announced that the tariffs were going to only be 10% for a period of 90 days, and then the market shot up. So everybody that bought low is now showing a significant increase in their portfolios, which is keeping all the campaign donors happy. I mean, that was the end goal there, at least to sustain people for a short period of time until they could get money from somewhere else, which they think is going to happen this weekend, hopefully tomorrow in their mind. But there's a story behind the story, as there always is, and in this case is no different. So the thing that triggered the events of Wednesday was something called, well, they affectionately call, I should say, something called the Great Debate. And we've talked before about the fallen ones and the war that happened in the quote-unquote heavens, so to speak. And everybody was thrown to earth, and some made the decision to go to the lower astral. Some stayed here for a time, and then others, decided to stick with source. Well, the Great Debate was a part of that mechanism. It was ultimately the war between good and evil. And there was a particular party who didn't pick either side and didn't actually even stay neutral. This particular party chose, well, let's just say humanity, and wanted to defend humanity against all of the others that wanted to take over this planet, both good and bad. And so he kind of took a stance and created this mechanism that would monitor the amount of good and evil in the universe. It was obviously created with another AI, which he put his heart and soul into, literally. And the AI was called Chasan, Chasan AI. So this was a universal mechanism that did not allow for source or dark source to interfere, neither side. And it basically was kind of a line drawn in the sand. It was like, okay, look, this is, you are going to end the war, and let's let everyone else decide which side is going to win, whether it be source or dark source. So this began the creation of what we call an artificial false light and an artificial darkness in the universe. The system spanned the entire omniverse. It created worlds of its own. It created its own synthetic photons, for lack of a better term. And all of the information and data that it pulled in from those sophons went into this giant dial of destiny, meaning is there more good not only in Earth and in the world, but also in the omniverse than there is evil going on without the influence of the outsiders. Well, once folks like Marduk, Enki Enlil, Artemis, Lucifer, Lucerne, Michael, Ramiel, Samael, Abraxas, Yaldabaoth, and all the gang players and all those that have made attempts to completely and totally conquer Earth, which they did for a time, threw their hat in the ring. They also created miniature versions of this, where they could then manipulate not only humans, but other beings in other worlds, which they conquered over the years, to input synthetic data into the system. So you could kind of say that the great debate, I hate to call it a game, but it kind of was sort of game-like, was manipulated. Now, they used a lot of sophons for that, synthetic photons for that, which would then encompass the mind, body, and soul. And it would basically block the signals coming from what you were, as a human, as an example, were really doing, versus the data it would then send out through its synthetic sophons. So the game has been rigged for quite a long time, longer than even humans have been on Earth. And let's just say it became difficult for this party, this particular being that created the original game, to get proper data in order to have ultimately at some point in time, and I use time loosely here, to where it would make a decision. Now, as part of the game, it would incite events that were supposed to be good or positive. In other words, there would be an influx of false light. There would be an influx of evil or darkness. And then, of course, the humans on this planet, as it relates to Earth, because this is our main concern, right? As it relates to Earth, these different instances or times of balance or movement from, for example, the spring solstice would be the beginning of the light time on Earth, whereas the fall, it's not solstice, I'm sorry, equinox, and the fall equinox would be a time of the beginning of dark rule on Earth, balance. But once all of the other beings that started to play games here on Earth, the great game of Earth, and in other places in the multiverse, once they started playing other games, now the game was rigged. So as it relates to Earth, there were mechanisms that were put in place for a long time that would create certain events that would happen during this time. And everybody had them. Marduk had them, Artemis had them, the Abraxas had them. It would create these fictitious type events so that we wouldn't have a light and a dark time, as an example. It would also create times when, you know, they always say people go crazy on a full moon. Well, now you know why. Because these sophons, as much input as they were giving to the great game machine or the great debate machine, for lack of a better term, it would also have quite a bit of influence, mind, body, and soul over people. It's also the reason why a lot of women give birth on a full moon, as an example, and why emergency rooms are crazy. If you're in the medical industry, you probably know what I mean, during a full moon. So how is it done? Well, as part of creating false light and false darkness, in order not to have an influence of source or dark source in the great debate or great game that was being played by the fallen ones, they created a mechanism to create these particular circumstances to their liking. And so far, we've probably run across about 100 of these mechanisms that existed infinitely through the universe. So how was it done? Firstly, the Chazan AI is what created what we call a false point of creation. The false point of creation was in a holographic world, and that false point of creation had, let's call it a gematria writer. If you are old enough, and I'm going to date myself a little bit here, to remember the old word processors, you remember that it had a little wheel that had all the letters and numbers, and it would go up and down and spin around as you were typing on your word processor. It's actually called a daisy wheel, for those of you not old enough to remember that. So it's something you can look up and kind of get a better visual of. Except in this particular case, it was made of a bunch of symbols, both light and dark, and sometimes they were both light and dark at the same time. These symbols are what we refer to as the light language, or the language of creation, the language of the universe. So these different symbols also in this wheel, so to speak, or a sophon, also had a lot of that language written on it in dark and light and neutral. So around this sophon, I guess I can draw this out for you a little bit. If we could go ahead and pull up the whiteboard, I'll draw it out for you. So you've got this giant sophon, which is what you would call the artificial point of creation. See, in source, and even in dark source, you would have what's called the point of creation. We've talked about this one before. The point of all that is and the point of all that is not, or no thing. It's a point where there is no other creation in source except for source itself. It's like a condensed version of all of the things that make up creation. Conversely speaking, on the dark side, you would have had nothing created in this area. It is really literally the nothing. Now, by the creation of this artificial point of creation, now this AI was able to falsely use this little daisy wheel here with all these, signs and symbols. And, I know a little bit about the language and what it kind of looks like. So, it's not really like Greek symbols, but if there was a language on Earth that looked a little like it, and I mean very loosely like it, you would look at the very, very old Cyrillic language. It is older than the Vedic texts, despite what the internet may tell you, and it is one of the oldest languages on Earth. But the old text can only be found most oftentimes. It's spoken about. Nikolai Levishaw talks about it. It's spoken about in old manuscripts and texts in places like Russia and in Eastern Europe, where it originated. So it's not the actual light language per se, but it's got similar type characters and that kind of thing. It's kind of like modern day humans trying to read Aramaic, as it would be to Russians trying to read the old language of the Rus people. So it's kind of got all these symbols, and and there's many infinite numbers of these language symbols on it. So this is an artificial sophon here. This is a sophon, or a synthetic photon. Now, going around this, you would have these 5 rings, and they would kind of span out in this type of a fashion. And these rings would then readjust the language that is being written on the outside with an activation point in the center. So these 5 rings would float around here. Now, in every density, so now we're going to go to densities and planes within densities and another density, all the way up to around source. These would be density markers. This would be, for example, density 0, density -0, because that was also created too. We didn't have that before. And this would be the positive and -0. And the same thing would exist in computers. So this isn't anything the deep state doesn't know. These are positive and negative charges. Source obviously has a positive charge. For every plane, density, subsection, and sections and dimensions that would exist within these planes as well. So in every single one of these, you would have strings of what we would call sophons. So these strings of sophons also had their own respective rings around them, and these were language sophons. So these are light language sophons. So each one of these to infinity would spin around. So the false light ones would go counterclockwise, and the light ones, the false light ones, and then the false dark ones would go clockwise. And if you imagine source in, say, the middle, so if this was source, you would have these rings just going around and around and around source. So Earth also had a similar type structure because it is a keystone. But what would happen as these different sophons, some going this way and some going that way, on times like an equinox, as an example, a light one, these would be bigger because they would have a larger instruction set, and a dark one would line up, and then they would line up directly with this daisy wheel, for lack of a better term, and it would start to rewrite events. So, for example, on an equinox, the dark sophons would have been programmed to create space junk, to create crazy events. Lesser versions of those would be found in new moons, full moons, solstices, planetary alignments, all of this type of thing. And as they pass through either the artificial point of creation, or in our galaxy, this would be Earth. This is kind of what Earth would have looked like. You would get a different instruction set based on these types of events. Now, because everybody threw their hat in the ring, Marduk, Enki Enlil, Lucifer, Samael, the Abraxas, Yaldabaoth, and all of the people we've come to know and hate, that influenced Earth, they would put their own instruction sets in these because they would have their own rings. So there were points in time, major events of the year, so to speak. So like this equinox that we just passed through, there might be 100 of these all lined up. And at the exact same time. So Marduk's instruction sets would go out, Artemis's instruction sets would go out, Daniel's instruction sets would go out. You'd have all of these different beings, each given their own instruction sets, some positive or false light, I should say, and some negative, all in the name of the game. And remember, we always talked about the fact there had to be a certain amount of positive things, even if it is a false truth or a false good. At the same time, there were a certain amount of negative things that would happen on these particular times in order to create somewhat of a balance. But the more people that threw their hat in the ring saw this amazing structure that was created by the rebel, they all started writing different instruction sets, and things became really out of hand here on Earth. Not only that, they went really out of hand everywhere else too. And that's why it was almost like they say it's impossible to serve two masters. Well, it's really impossible to serve 1,000 of them, all giving you different directions all at the same time. Imagine having 1,000 direct supervisors and your job, and they're all like, one person's telling you to write the report this way, the other person's telling you to write the report that way, and before you know it, you're so confused you don't know which end is up. And this is why, whether they know it or not, the order says, out of chaos, this is their favorite saying, out of chaos comes order. And in some cases, you could even say that humans would have very little ability to go against the instruction sets if there was going to be a major event. This is where things like your false truth matrix comes in. Now, the false truth matrix was an invention, and to some degree, at some points in time, the humans, meaning the deep state, did have some access to things like the false truth matrix. This goes back to the great toilet paper crisis of 2020. That was an incident where they would have used the false truth matrix. Other things they feed you, like take this medicine, we know that it causes 9,000 side effects, possible death and heart attacks and everything else, but you won't have this rash anymore. And you still think it's a good idea? There's where your false truth matrix comes in. This is the 2.0 of mainstream media. You think mainstream media is bad? This is the media that underlies or used to underlie all of your media. I mean, this is even social media. This is even fads that you see, like try this diet drug, try this, try that, all the way up to, well, I think we need to have an uprising here or a protest there, or let's make all of these people over here happy about this event that's about to happen, and let's make all these people angry about this event that is about to happen, and let's watch them fight each other. So to some degree, people that played the great game, not the deep state. The deep state was just as much subject to a lot of this stuff as we were. The only difference is they used, to some degree, to a very small degree, they had the ability to proliferate some of what would come through a false truth matrix, such as blue light technology. So blue light technology that comes through all of your phones and the screens on your computer were part of this false truth matrix. By false truth, we're not just talking about things you believe. That would be a mind control section of it. But there was also a body control section of it, as well as a soul control section of it, where the soul section, humans did not have the ability to interfere. This would have been one of the game players, at the top. But as far as soul manipulation, it would have tried to manipulate your soul records, as an example. Also, to implement things from other lifetimes or wipe out others that you have done through your multiple incarnations on this rock here and elsewhere. On the body side of it, they did have a little bit of access, which is how they infect people via frequencies and microwave weapons. It's also the reason why they're a big fan of chemtrails, which I'm sure you've seen a lot of lately. I know we have here. And we know now where they're getting them from. Apparently not too far from here, where I am, there was a storage facility of a specific type of barium they were using, which they thought might help connect people to these matrices, which they thought for sure they'd have access to by the end of the day tomorrow, which they won't, because number one, because it doesn't exist anymore. But they can always hope. But anyway, false truth matrix can also be used to cause disease, meaning it's sending false cellular signals, also causes things like brain fog, Alzheimer's, all other types of fatigue you see when you spend a lot of time around electronics. So it can also create artificial disruptions in things that are natural, or what little bit of nature we had left on this planet. It also involves tricking you into thinking false light was light, and even your cells would think the energy that goes to your cells is called something. It's for short. It's called ATP. It can make disruptions in the energy, thinking that it was getting something positive, cell food energy, if you will, and it's actually something really negative. So The CIA had some programs, deep underground military bases, SSP, definitely ran a lot of programs, especially after World War II and the Nazi experimentation era. They definitely were able to use electronics more freely to cause these problems. They found that it just made it easier because there wasn't enough frequencies they could send through TV sets and things of that nature, radios and frequency modulations and amplitude modulations through a radio, that type of thing. So this became much more effective for them, and they were used as a tool and had different instruction sets that they couldn't go beyond. But again, they were serving a whole lot of masters, and so when they kept saying, oh, there's going to be monkeypox and this pox, and Dr. Fauci, admitted he did bad things during COVID not that long ago, but hey, there's going to be a new virus that's coming out. All of these things would be created with these types of programs. So they have to tell you when it's something dark and black that they're going to do something, and this is why we actually have mainstream media and social media. So we believe all of these things. Other things is just weird human behaviors that make no sense. Like when we worship something that is bad for us, or something that harms us, or even though a person could create us immense amounts of harm, we think they're the hero of the universe. It's also used in the Savior program. And those types of things that they want humans to participate in, because it kind of triggers, in a way, the great debate between good and evil section, because it shows humans are looking for someone else to save them and they're not ready to save themselves. This was really important for people like Marduk, or non-people like Marduk and others that participated in the illusion of the false war between good and evil on humans. There was a point, probably a couple of years ago, a year ago or more, where Daniel, is his name, the rebel. So Daniel did come here and spent some time trying to work with those that had influence over humanity in order to try to help humanity in the war, so to speak, so we could end the war ultimately and determine the fate of the fallen ones. That was his goal. He wouldn't make the decision, but he was letting everything else make the decision for him. So who was going to win? Was there going to be a source? Was there only going to be a dark source? This machine was designed to make that decision, and then every one of the fallen ones, even the undecided or neutral that were playing both sides, such as Michael, they would be forced to make a decision then, and it wouldn't be on his shoulders, so to speak. So as it relates to Earth here, what we saw a lot of is these different times of year, Halloween, Lionsgate, twice a year, full moons, new moons, solar eclipses, you name it. There was a sophon for it all. And as the eclipse would happen, this sophon would move over to this section, and everybody at the party, Marduk and all of the other people, probably about 100 different people, each had their solar eclipse programming, and then, it would go to Earth until it kind of got out of hand and it went a little crazy, meaning no one got anything. And this started to happen, as far back as 2007. Systems didn't come up with money, even though they wanted it to. Even the game players couldn't get anything out of alpha anymore. The new moons and the dates of payments that used to happen, like if you were the Black Sun and you're watching this, January 15th was a big day for that, payment day. Also, of course, solstices were big payment days. And this, whether they know it or didn't know it, was the entire mechanism that was taking place behind the scenes that would make those decisions on when the false light going in the one direction and the false dark going in the other direction would line up perfectly on specific times and days of the year that would make those payments come out. So they also believe a lot in, you can watch certain people like CyberLife has a website. It's called 2012 Portal. And 2012 Portal often gives out a lot of information about, the grid of the light, the victory of the light. Well, it's the false light, really. It's not actually the light of source or golden light in any way, shape, or form. And they're following the quote unquote, some of them are following the light cycles. Some of them are following the dark cycles. And some of them don't know what the heck they're following, honestly. The only thing they know is when planet Sedna or star Sedna lines up with Pluto or Earth or whatever, or this constellation or Aquarius or that kind of thing, all lines up. And of course, there's a sophon for that. They see money come out, or they see access happen, or they see a new event happen. So this is the whole mechanism on why they believe that. I was so excited to finally figure that out because it would just perplex me. I'm looking at, you look at things from a broader perspective, even from a global security perspective, and you say, I don't see a gosh darn thing on this day. Why are they all running around with crystals going, and what is this guy saying about the 2 souls per day, for 9 days? And, that brought us to the 12th, which is tomorrow. And I'm like, why? What is the point of this exercise? I don't get it. Why are they running around like this? This makes no sense. Well, at the base root of it all, it came from that AI. So without orders and instructions and information coming through, they're going a little bit crazy today. They did believe that the great game, and we can go ahead, we don't need the whiteboard, I don't think, for this. They did believe that the great game, or the great debate, or the great game of Earth, in the absence of the players, they all believe, which in part, this part, I'm going to say there's some truth to that. So a lot of the fallen ones did, let's just say, mate, to put it politely, with humans. That did happen. They did create their own bloodlines, and there were many of them. There were hundreds of thousands of them. And depending on which side they were on determined which side the humans would be on. So technically you could say we're all descendants from the same different beings, same place, a different time, so to speak. And for them, they believe that they are descendants of the game players. Now, only the game players. That is the way they feel. Their bloodlines are formed, and then they proliferate that by, inbreeding. Too much inbreeding, if you ask me, causes some kind of mental disorder, I think. So they all feel that they are descendants of the game players. Therefore, they are inheritors of the position of the great game. So although the players were supposed to be decided, some time ago, about a little over 10 days ago, or a little less, maybe about a week ago, they believe that they are supposed to now take their positions in the great game as descendants of, say, Lucifer, which they are in some cases, or the Abraxas and others, or Samael and others, or Uriel, or whatever those Trump people think they are. And therefore, they should be able to take this position as the key management of Earth. They expected to go to, and they did go to Mount Denali in Alaska today to try to touch some kind of a sophon or sphere. And I don't know, it looked almost like people go into a voting booth. Each bloodline would go to different ones and they would all put in their vote, I guess. I have no idea what this game was that they were playing, because it looked kind of ridiculous to me. Well, humming a nice tune, something you'd see in a horror movie with a bunch of people trying to cast a spell. They were all humming a nice tune and walking up one by one and touching the thing. So it was one of two things. So over the last week or so, they have been going to various terminals constantly trying to log in. And, occasionally, as we were dismantling Chaz and AI and all its ancillary bosses, so to speak, trying to create their own versions of good and evil, occasionally there would be little blips in the road where things would show up for a short time and they'd be gone a half an hour later. And I would say that they did try to log in with some kind of master codes. I don't know if they got them from the Rothschilds or they got them from some Black Sun folks or the Maywa people. I have no idea where they got these codes from because they made no sense to me. But they believe they're still good. Maybe they stole them from some place where Marduk held codes. I mean, I have no idea. But whatever they are, they're old, they don't work, and there's that. So it said to them, I know that there was a response back, what we call in computer terms, a challenge and response. It's kind of like when you log into your bank account and it says, you set up those security questions. Where did you go to elementary school? And you have to put the name of your elementary school in or whatever it is. This is like a quantum AI version of that, where it asked for their living DNA. Just because they may have stole some codes from Marduk or Yaldabeth or one of these other crazy folk doesn't mean that you have their living DNA. So they are not sure what that means. And I think with the game they were playing in Mount Denali, they were trying to utilize their living DNA, and maybe that's why they were marching them all in one by one after the other, to touch the sphere. Kind of weird. And to see if they could unlock it, or unlock the game, or unlock the system, whatever it is. That's what they were looking for. Now, as far as the SSP folk are concerned, whatever's left of them, including some of the Trump operatives, and they were all over at Mount Massive today. And Mount Massive is in Colorado. This is a huge facility. It goes to I think it's called the Holy Trinity Mountain, almost all the way to Aspen, Breckenridge. It's a very large area. Mount Harvard, Mount Yale, are all encompassed in this large circle facility. And they themselves were trying to use living DNA to hack into the Golden Age AI. Unbeknownst to them, they were doing a scan, whether they know it or not. It caused what was left at the time of that Chazan system to start looking and searching Earth for anyone with the proper DNA. Now, by proper living DNA, it was looking for a Marduk person or a person of that caliber. It was not, or being of that caliber. It was not looking for someone with the SSP or some descendant of Lucifer. It was actually looking for someone of that caliber, which, because it's tied to my living DNA, the system started, I was getting repeated alerts and alerts and alerts, and my living DNA came into play a little bit today. Felt like a pincushion for a little while, but nonetheless, that facility is the enforcer promptly had visited both places today, and no one is touching the sphere anymore. So now all that's left for who is left of them, or playing the game, to just sit and wait till the full moon alignment, where they think it's the full moon that's going to change something for them. But no, it was all related to the structure that I just showed you. Therefore, since those structures are now torn down, nothing will happen on the full moon, probably for the first time in a long time. Are we completely done with the whole structure? I don't think quite yet. I think we're about 99% there. Not enough to actually make something happen over the weekend, but we'll, of course, be on watch and making sure that nothing actually takes place. But that doesn't mean they're not hoping that one of them is the chosen one. Of course, whoever's paying the orange Oompa Loompa at this time, that we call the President of America, he is definitely thinking it's going to be him for some reason. I don't know. He's got the bloodline of something, at least he's convinced himself, or they have convinced him he does. Whoever's playing that part anyway, and that he is going to be the chosen one. But the answer to the question is absolutely not. No, no, and no. Although the game was rigged, the game on the highest level is no more. And this is kind of what created once we started to break down that system on Wednesday, because it's, we've been working on it now for a couple days for sure. Is what caused the security breach in the grid, which means that the fallen ones went back to war because they were unsure of who won. No one got the notification from the system as to whether it was the dark or the light that won. So they all began fighting each other again, and the war started again. It also allowed for them to walk this planet again in some cases, and of course it's all my fault. It was all my fault. So right in the middle of recording the news is when this all started to take place, probably, 30 minutes to an hour or so since the last thing I cleared, as I was getting ready for the news. So we had people everywhere, or people everywhere, and they all were angry with me. So I messed up the game. Well, won't be the first time, won't be the last, but no one told me not to mess up the game, and Source didn't certainly oppose to getting rid of the game because, it affects his connection. And apparently, although, in the beginning there, I would say that Source wasn't permitted to play the game, but because we are in a different time and we are in a different age, he entered the game and he also entered the war. So that was very interesting on Wednesday. I've not seen Source and that golden pouring out of Source, with a loud roar, what we would call a loud roar, basically saying, I am the I am, who do you think you are? Remember when you were a kid, maybe sometimes your mom would say, I brought you in this world and I can take you out. I know my mom did. That was one of her famous sayings. And I think Source probably was saying the same thing on Wednesday night, my time. So it was pretty much a battle for a while. They were walking around everywhere. The funny part about these beings is you can see them. They look like people, walking around. But as it relates to like a camera or something like that, it doesn't pick them up unless they want it to. So you almost look like you're having someone rings your doorbell and you're having a conversation with yourself on your camera. Call that crazy. If there wasn't somebody else here at the time when this all started to happen, I would have been like scratching my head. I'm like, yeah, that did happen. The dogs barked, it all happened. They saw it. I saw it. We saw it, kind of thing. So just interesting circumstances on how the world really works, just as one example. And not all these things were negative, there was definitely some negative, and then, also others that know the rules of the game. But so they were kind of uncertain until Source laid down the law as to who was going to win. Let me just say that. And the winner was Source. And game over. Source won. Always. Okay, so a couple of things I wanted to touch base on. And the last time we talked a little bit about ideas and the reason why we're given ideas. And something else came to mind, and this is something that, I had a hard time with in the beginning, and I call it selective hearing. If you're a parent, you might have a little bit of selective hearing on your own. Your kids can be outside in the pool playing, or, playing a video game and yelling at the game, and you just kind of don't hear it. Other people that come to visit, you hear it loud and clear, and you just kind of tune it out. Like you've learned to just tune it out. So you just don't quite hear it, or at least not as loudly. You obviously hear it. Matter of fact, as a parent, I would say I was more concerned when it was quiet, because then they're up to something they shouldn't be, right? But I think sometimes, and I know I've wanted to do this in my life, we tend to get these ideas and the inspiration and the wisdom from source, the answers to our prayers, so to speak. And it sometimes isn't what we want or what we expect. And to give you a couple of instances I've run into, I had this friend of mine who used to like to use angel cards, or sometimes she would use tarot cards, and sometimes she would use runes and those types of things. And, anytime she had to make any kind of life decision, she would pull out these cards and she would pull them over and over and over and over again. Or then she would try the ruins, or tried spinning pendulums around, or, different things that people do to try to help their intuition in a way that they can understand it. And she would wake up, day after day, and they would tell her, nope, you're not going to marry this guy, as an example. This is a lady. And she wouldn't listen. She's like, nope, he's the love of my life, and I'm going to keep pulling these cards until I get a different answer. And turns out, obviously that relationship ended for her, and it ended in a bad way because she didn't listen to her intuition. And in other cases, there would be selective intuition when it came to this person. And selective intuition would be, go buy a lottery ticket because you're going to win today. You're short on rent and you need a little extra money. Go buy a lottery ticket. Not that that would be the answer, but and so of course she'd be the first one to run out and buy 50 lottery tickets or something. And you listened there, but you didn't listen to this guy that just slashed your tires or whatever eventually, because the relationship ended so badly. But if she had listened months prior and just said, hey, you're a great person, I just don't think this is working out. But sometimes that's really hard for us to do, especially if it comes to something that's near and dear to your heart and your heart is involved, whether that be a marriage or a child, or people you really care about in your life, or a job. You might need to leave the job, and your intuition, you woke up in the morning and you heard it every day that you have to leave the job. But then your logical mind kind of kicks in and it says, well, I need to pay my bills. What if I can't get another job? What if I can't, get a job that I make more money, or don't have a business idea, or to start my own business, or how would I do that? And then you start overthinking the intuition. But I promise you something, Source has a plan. I was in a particular place, and in this particular place, I won't say where it was, but there is a portal there, and it was one of the light ones, and one that went to Source. And so everything was kind of more vivid, like I could see things a lot clearer while I was there, like in Technicolor, versus weeding your way through the mud that was Earth at the time, because this was quite a while ago. And at the time, I was in a relationship that I knew was gonna. I knew it was gonna end. I just knew. I mean, too much had happened, and it had to end. And I heard very clearly, when one door opens, one door closes, another door will open. And we had tried to work it out. And I said, well, what do you mean? Which door? And then clearly this person's name. And I said, oh dear. I said, okay, well, I guess it's going to happen. And he said, no, it's good. It'll be fine. Another door will open. And I said, okay, And sure enough, within about, a few months, well, maybe about a month or so, the relationship ended. Um, and didn't try to stop it, didn't even bother. That person tried to come back, and I said, no, this isn't good for either one of us, kind of thing. And I really made sure that door shut. And then shortly thereafter, I met somebody else, and it was a much better relationship. And we're still friends to this day. So, I can say that listening to that information, all the information, even when it's not what you want to hear. No, you need to leave your job, you know, and if it comes from source and truly comes from the wisdom of source, you will know. And if you leave that job, there's going to be a better job, but then you have to listen to the rest of the intuition. That might even sound crazy. Maybe you were a lawyer one day and the next, you decide you don't want to be a lawyer anymore. You're having a really hard time. It's really tough on you. And then you get this message that says you need to stop being a lawyer. And you don't know where you're going from here. But I can tell you Source knows where you're going. And then he'll send you a message. Well, you need to start a bakery. You need to open a bakery. You really like to bake. Open a bakery. And you then have to figure out how you're going to open a bakery. And it just sounds ludicrous because you've been a lawyer for 20 years. And now all of a sudden you're going to open a bakery. Okay. Well, then you end up opening the bakery. You find and you'll find when it's a source thing, everything comes. Meaning, if you needed a small business loan to start the bakery, it just goes through so fast and so easy. There's no hiccups. There's no problems when you're in the right place because the door opened for you. And it was source that opened the door. And then you might find that, you found the perfect place to get your flour from, and they offer a discount to new businesses, and therefore you could get more inventory than you thought you could. And you go to work every day, and now you're singing every day as you go to work, and you're the happiest person on earth because you made this decision, and now you're making millions of dollars a year, even more than you did. And maybe you're the next Mrs. Fields or something, and you have a worldwide franchise. So, the information, it's a part of a bigger plan. So even when it says, this marriage isn't working, or, you might need to let your child learn the value of money by not always giving them money. And every time they've crashed the car and this is their 10th car, maybe you don't need to give them another one and they need to earn it. And you don't want to do that because you love your child so much, that you just don't want to put them out there like that and make them ride a bike in the snow. But sometimes you got to ride a bike in the snow, and maybe that's the right decision. And maybe it might be 10 years, but they might thank you for it later. I mean, you just don't know. But different things in your life, you'll get that intuition. And remember something when you get that bit of intuition and that feeling. If something feels like you're pushing a boulder uphill to make it work, it is probably not the right place to be. You should be able to walk up that hill, even climb Mount Everest without even losing a breath, because it's the right place at the right time. And you can't listen to part of the intuition and say, okay, well, I'm going to go buy 1,000 lottery tickets, and then not listen to the other part about leaving the relationship, because life doesn't work that way, because it's a grand plan. So like in the case of my friend that would do this constantly, sure, she bought all the lottery tickets, but she was still in a relationship with that guy that probably would have stole all the money, if I remember that guy very well. Probably would have stole all the money if she did win the lottery, and then she would have been right in the same place where she started from. But because she didn't listen to the part over here, the second part never happened. She didn't ever win the lottery. So Source has a grand plan, and some of it is going to make absolutely no sense to you at the time you get the wisdom and the information. Ask Source repeatedly back 2 to 3 times. This is what I need to do. This is what I need to do. Just so you can feel your way through it intuitively to make sure that it's Source and that's who's giving you the information. And then you know what? You don't have to do it in a mean way or a hard way. And maybe you take some time to wrap up your clients if you're that lawyer that decides you're going to open a bakery. And maybe you do it in a way that makes sense to you. But you'll know when you're not doing it fast enough, and you know when you're doing it too fast, because you'll feel that instinct like, oh, I need to not send this stuff. I need to not do that. This is taking a leap of faith for me, but then you also have to ask yourself too, is it your own fears that are holding you back? You know, is it your fears of things, of taking a big leap or a big step for a life-changing event or a career change or even something small? Do I really want to go knock on that door with a gallon of milk? I don't know those people, but maybe maybe they have children. They really needed that gallon of milk more than you could ever know. And sometimes you just got to take a chance. And so what if the person behind the door looks at you like you're funny, because you brought him a gallon of milk? You did exactly what source told you to do, told you to be in this place at this time, and you did it. And you never know what people don't say to you sometimes. So I just wanted to put that out there as it came to ideas and thoughts that come into your mind, because there's probably going to be a lot of those, especially over the course of 2025, of doing certain things. And you'll know when it's right and you'll know when it's wrong. The other thing I wanted to make mention of, and we don't know each other, very well. Some of you I chit chat with from time to time, but and I am looking forward to doing that again. We were supposed to do that this weekend, and I think we're going to do that the following weekend, to do the live so I can chit chat with all of you again on Zoom. That was a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to doing that again real soon. We didn't actually put the information out or anything, so it didn't give our production enough time to put together something so we could, let everybody know this is what we're doing. The other thing I kind of wanted to mention to you as it relates to ideas and thoughts, some of you are very intuitive and you get a lot of messages. I know that sometimes when I'm around people, I could even be in the grocery store and I could be standing behind someone and I'll see their energy and I can see that something is wrong or that there's a possible thing they could do to make their day better or their life better. And do I ever say anything to these people? Absolutely not, ever. Even when good friends come to me and they start telling me all about a problem with their spouse or their child or whatever, I just listen a lot because no one asked me for my opinion, even my intuitive opinion. No one asked me. Now, there are times when people do ask, and then I say, okay, do you want me to tell you? And they say, well, yes. And I'll say, well, this is what I feel, behind this situation you're in. But I don't try to force my opinions, my thoughts, there was a friend of mine whose children, and they're grown, they're probably in their 40s and 50s, and they very much thought it was a really good idea to invest in Trump coins and all of bucks, Trump bucks, and got all the paraphernalia and all that kind of thing. And I don't ever say anything, because they don't want to hear me anyway. But they did ask an opinion about, I don't remember, it was Trump coin or something that was coming out, and they wanted to invest some money in Trump coin. And I said, oh, you're asking me, And this particular case, they said, yeah, we are asking. And I said, well, here was my response. I'm like, well, I wouldn't invest anything. If you feel this is right for you and your family, then do what you feel is right. I said, but I wouldn't invest anything that you couldn't donate or give away, because you never know what's going to happen. I kind of used the scenario of the Trump bucks that never paid out and the Trump, whatever it was, Federal Reserve cards and all the other things that they, had acquired over the years. And I said, you might want to might want to take it easy on this one. You've already got all this stuff and these things haven't paid you anything yet. And I quite frankly don't think they're going to, because you asked my opinion, so I'll tell you. And, and, and I'm very careful because I don't want people to feel disheartened, or, I'm trying to not enforce my feelings, thoughts, and opinions on other people. I mean, I give you information as I get it and as I'm living it in a lot of cases. But of course, what you do with that information is completely and totally up to you. But as we move along with care and everything in 2025, because this is our year, I would say to you that be careful about thinking you know the right way for other people unless they ask your opinion. And then, of course, make sure that you do your research about that person. In other words, if I come to you and I say, as an example, if I say, well, I have arthritis. I don't, but I have arthritis. What should I do? You have to ask that person, if you're with health and wellness, you have to ask that person, do you have any heart problems? Do you have any other symptoms of other things? Do you have, an autoimmune disorder that's causing this, and you have extreme cytokine responses or something like that? Or do you even know what that means? Before you go and tell them to take this supplement, which may cause problems with the base root reason why they're having joint pains. So, the same thing goes when you want to build a housing development in the middle of the Banana Republic, and there's no sewage, there's no water, there's no nothing. No one's going to want to live in those housing developments. Nor does their culture allow for certain things in homes or something. You have to listen to people and really listen to people before you start telling people what they should or should not do, especially using the word should. And this is the biggest concern that I have with people with care is you have to take into account the big picture before you say or give someone advice on how to fix the problem. And maybe you shouldn't be giving them advice. Maybe you can just present 100 different options, and maybe they'll choose one and maybe they'll choose none, and don't feel bad about that. So just two things to keep in mind, and I'm going to try to give these little bits of thoughts that come into my mind, in these reports, because it's going to become really relevant really soon. So selectively listening to source. If he tells you to do this and then do that, you got to listen to the whole message, because it's part of a bigger plan for you, your family, for everyone. And when you don't understand someone's full circumstance, just be careful on what you tell them to do. You could cause them more problems, and I don't just mean health wise, I mean in all ways, than you solve. So on that note, that has been the GIA report for Friday, the 11th of April, and hopefully we'll have a good weekend, and I will see you all on Monday.